going to be drafting the pattern for our dirndl skirt, for the dirndl skirt sew along part of the playsuit sew along. So let's get started. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to need to do is take some measurements, and you will need your waist measurement, and you also need to know how long you want your skirt to be. So the basic design of our skirt, we're going to have a waistband and a button placket. Put the buttons on there. With our gathered skirt on there. So that's basically what we're doing. So we're going to be drafting two pieces, the waistband and the button placket, and then we'll be measuring and cutting the skirt directly on the fabric. So first we need to know how long we want our skirt to be and how big we want our waistband to be. For my waistband, I want my waistband to be 2 inches tall, and my skirt is going to be 30 inches long from the waistband. If you're not sure how long you want your skirt, you can always take a measuring tape and dangle it from your waist until it gets down long enough to where you want your skirt to end, and that's how you can measure out your waistband. Okay, so I've got my 2-inch waistband, my 30-inch length for my skirt. Alright, then I want to add 1/2 an inch for the seam allowance for the top edge of the button placket, and I'm going to put 1 inch for the hem at the bottom. So we have waistband, skirt length, 1/2 an inch seam allowance for the top, and 1 inch for the hem. And we add that up together. That means it's going to be 33.5 inches long for my pattern piece. So now I need to decide how wide I want to make my pattern. So you're going to want your buttons. And these are the buttons that I'm going to be using on my skirt. And these buttons are 3/4 of an inch. So you want to make sure that you're going to have enough space on either side of your button, on your button placket, for there to be some space so the button doesn't overlap off of the button placket. Alright, so if I look, I think I'm going to make my button placket 1.25 inches, because that will give some nice spacing on the sides. We're going to be putting our buttonholes in vertically, so we don't have to worry about spacing the buttonholes horizontally on the button placket. Okay, so we're going to cut our button placket in one piece, and it's going to wrap around, so it's going to have a built-in facing. So we're going to want this to be ×2. We're going to again add our 1/2 an inch seam allowance. And again, ×2, because it needs to be on both sides of the facing. So that gets us, too much math here, 1.5 × 2 is 2.5, it's 1, so this will be 3.5 inches wide for our button placket. Alright, and we're just going to draw a rectangle for that, for our button placket. Okay, and then when we get to our button plackets, we're going to want to cut 2 plus cut 2 of interfacing. Alright. So then we have to decide how big do we want our waistband to be. So my waist is 29.5 inches, and I like to add about 1/2 an inch to 0 inches of ease on my waistband, so that it actually stays at my waist and doesn't sag down, so I get that high-waisted look. So if you're not sure about how much ease you like in your skirts, it's a good idea to measure one of the skirts that you have that fits really well and sits where you'd like your skirt, so you know about how big you want your skirt to be. So I'm going to make my waistband 30 inches long. Alright, now we already have the button pocket, which is going to give us the 3.5 inches. So we want to subtract the 3.5 inches from the button placket so we don't have that length on there twice. Alright, and then we're going to add 1 inch for seam allowance so that we have ½ inch on each end. And that will give us our waistband. Whoops, that's not right. Sorry, for the button placket, we want to use the width of the button placket. Bad math, don't do that. Alright, so instead of the 3.5, that's the total size for the piece, we want to use the 1.25 inches wide that we want the finished placket to be. That would be bad, my skirt would be tiny. So that means that I need my waistband piece to be 29.75 inches long. And I already decided earlier that I want my waistband to be 2 inches high, right? And we're going to add 1 inch for seam allowance on the top and the bottom. That'll give us a ½ inch each, so that means it's going to be 3 inches tall for the waistband. Okay? So you're going to draw out your rectangle. I like to use tracing paper, which you can get from art supply stores. Get the really big pieces, not the little 8.5 by 11 sheets, because you'll be just taping forever. And you can tape them together if they're not long enough. And those are the two pieces you want to cut out. For the waistband, you want to cut 2 plus cut 1 interfacing for your waistband pieces. Alright, now let's talk about cutting the skirt, because there's 2 different ways paper is dirty, that we can cut out our skirt. So say this is our length of fabric. One way is we can decide how wide we want your skirt. I recommend between 2.5 to 3 yards to get a nice fluffy skirt. More if you are more fuller figured, or you want a fuller skirt, and you can use less if you are smaller and you want a less full skirt. So one way is to just measure down your length and cut it off like so, long ways. And this length is going to be your skirt length, so mine will be 30 inches, plus a ½ inch for seam allowance at the top, plus I'm leaving 1 inch for hem. So for a total, I'm going to want 31.5 inches long on my skirt pieces. Alright, so you can cut it this way, and then down here at the bottom you would have excess fabric to cut out your button placket and your waistband. A more fabric efficient method of cutting it out is to cut out this direction. So this would be your length, and you're probably going to have to cut out several pieces and sew them together. And then you'll have some side seams that you'll have to put in. Alright, so there's a couple of different things that you can use to determine your cutting layout for your skirt. One of them is if you have a directional fabric. So if you have fabric that direction goes this direction, then you want to use this cutting layout. Because if you use this cutting layout, then your pattern will be going sideways. If you think you might not have enough fabric, this direction way is more fabric efficient. This could also give you a good opportunity for putting pockets in the side. If you do 2 sections, and you cut this one in half, then that'll put you nicely a back piece, your two front pieces, and you'll have side seams where you can insert side seam pockets. If you want to make it quicker, easier, less work, then use this method, because then you won't have any side seams to sew up. So those are the two options that you can use. They both work. It just depends on your fabric and what you're looking to do. So let's go ahead and draw out our pattern pieces. So I got my measurements over here. I'm going to take my two pieces of tracing paper, and we're going to tape them together so that I can make sure I don't run out of room. Okay. Sometimes these things like to slide off the table, so you can put pattern weight or something on there just to keep everything where you want it to be. So, take my measurements. So first we're going to do my button placket. So it needs to be 33.5 inches long. So I have my measuring tape, and I'll measure out from the end 33.5 inches, which is actually off the table. And you just want to mark that. And then what I'll do is I'll take my ruler and I'm going to mark my width, which is 3.5 inches. And I'm going to mark that at regular intervals all the way down until I get to the 33.5 mark. Now usually I don't make my patterns in Sharpie, but I thought that would be easier for you guys to see what is going on. Alright, and then we just connect the dots. And we'll connect the dots at the bottom too. Okay, and you always want to label your pattern piece. So I'm going to do gathered Dirndl, I think that's how you spell Dirndl, skirt. And I'm going to put the year, 2014. That way if I come back to make another version, I need to tweak it, I can keep track of which version I have. And this will be our button placket. And we are going to cut 2 plus cut 2 interfacing. Alright, there you go. You could also, if you knew how far apart you wanted to space your buttonholes, go ahead and do that. But we're going to come back to that later in the process. Alright, so next I need to cut my waistband. And to save cutting, I'm just going to use this line as the baseline for my waistband. Alright, and it needs to be 29.75 inches. mark that. And it needs to be 3 inches tall. 3 inches. And connect those dots. Alright, and again we're going to label our gathered Dirndl skirt 2014. This will be our waistband. We want to cut 2 plus cut 1 interfacing. Alright, so now we're going to talk about some optional things that you might want to mark on your patterns. If you wanted to mark the center back of your waistband to help you line things up, you can do that by taking your total measurement, dividing it in half, and measuring that out and making a mark. The other thing that might be useful is a grain line. So grain line is going to be particularly important if you're doing a directional print and you want your print all going in the same direction. Or if you have, say, stripes, and you might want the stripes on the skirt to be going one direction, and be a different direction on the waistband, and a different direction on the button placket. So, my pattern is not directional, but I'm going to go ahead and draw on grain lines as if I wanted the directional pattern to all be going in the same direction. So the waistband grain line is going to go up and down so that it goes down the skirt. So we're just going to take our ruler at a 90-degree angle and draw our grain line. Now our button placket is going to be going at 90 degrees from the waistband. So we want its grain line to be going side to side. And again, if you wanted this to be really accurate, then you would want to measure so that was equidistant from both sides at both ends of the arrow, so that you have your grain lines to cut for cutting. And if your skirt's not directional, then you don't really have to worry about it as long as you're either cutting everything on the grain or the cross grain and not cutting on the bias, because that'll stretch too much. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do today is we're going to be cutting out our pattern. Remember, you're going to want to use one of these 2 layouts to cut out your skirt. Either the one where you cut it out long ways all the way and then cut your waistband and your button placket out of this area of the fabric, or you can cut this direction where you have to have seam lines. You're probably going to either need 2 or maybe even a 3rd way across, depending on how wide your fabric is, to get that nice full skirt, and then cutting your button placket and your waistband out of this part in the bottom. Alright, so that's it for this week. Come back next week and we're going to start